Hi, I am Peter van der Poelen, and today I'm going to show you a little application I wrote to test the Cumulus performance. It's always very hard when you have a new installation to assist the customer in choices of where to put the files, on what type of disks, SD disks, local disks, network, LAN, WAN, and what performance it will give. What will the Cumulus server do with 2 processors? With 4, does it need 4 or 8 gigabyte of RAM? What will it do if 20 users simultaneously start cataloging, etc.? All that kind of stuff is very depending on the infrastructure of the customer, and this little application will give you the opportunity to test and fine-tune your installation speed. It's a Java application, so it uses the Cumulus Java classes. You will receive a zip. You just unzip the contents of this zip in any Java classes installation, Cumulus Java Classes installation. That means you can drop it in the RoboFlow folder, or in a Cumulus SDK or runtime, or you can drop it in Web Solutions folder, or you can drop it in the Scheduler folder, whatever Java-based product of Canto. It contains a jar, which is the application, 2 scripts, which we will run the test bench. If you need a Linux or a macOS version, I can provide that as well. And then there's some result files with it that show you how the result will look like from the test, what information you get. So you get detailed information about files, you get what individual file was processed and how long it took, and maybe there were cataloging errors, or etc. etc. So every information that is needed to evaluate and fine-tune your installation. These are 2 example files that give you that information. If we're going back here, so what do you need to do once you copied in the files? Very simple. This batch file contains all the parameters, so I'm going to edit that file. The application is license protected. That means that the first time you run it, it will say that it's a demo version, and it will ask you to mail me the result file. By default you will get it like this, and then it will run in demo mode, so you can test with 5 files, and you can send me the result file, which I can give you a full license. The full license is just a license number here that you need to copy paste to this place, and then your application will run. You can either output the information to the system out parameter, and so you can decide just to have it in the terminal, but usually it's easier to have the output in a text file, so this here you specify where the output is stored. The next parameter is debug on or false or true. The difference is that if you set debugs to false, or you just remove this parameter, it will only output the summary at the end of the cataloging process or at the end of the test process. If you put debug to true, you get individual time information of every step in the process, accessing the file, copying the file, cataloging the file, etc. etc. Everything starts, and this is of course the mandatory parameter, is the folder. In which folder, from which folder are you going to catalog files? I have here an example of a local disk, which is an SD disk, which will be very fast. And then I have a second example here in a wireless network drive on my time capsule, which will be slower. In your test, you can also specify a maximum number of files that he's going to process. A good test bench is 100 files or maybe 1,000 files. So it's always important to measure the same amount of files and the same files. And so you can get exact results to compare your fine-tuning with. You can define a file filter. By default, it catalogs any file. This is the same terminology as used in RoboFlow. So the file filter, if you just specify the file formats you do not want, you want filtered out, or you can put an exclamation mark in front of it and you specify the file extensions that you do want to process. And so in this case, for instance, JPEG and TIFF. But don't forget, if you want to do this, to remove the REM, otherwise he will catalog anything. If you want just to do a file inventory to check how fast the network access is, or if it's a WAN, it can be important to point out to the customer, look, you want an inventory every 5 minutes of 100,000 files, but it takes 20 minutes to make the inventory. This is not going to work. So you can just not, for instance, specify a catalog, in which case he will not catalog the file, and in which case he will, of course, only make the inventory. If you do specify a catalog, he will catalog the file, and then you need to specify where your server is, what the Cumulus user is you want to use. Any user will do that with the proper permissions to catalog, the password, and the asset handling set. Also with the asset handling set, you have a lot of fine-tunings possibilities in your asset handling set. You can test with Vault, without Vault. You can enable asset stores or disable asset stores, bigger thumbnails, smaller thumbnails, all stuff that can speed up the cataloging process, and that can be used in this test bench. You only need to specify the asset handling set. In the past, I noticed that when copying a file or when getting file information like date and size, that in some infrastructures, especially WAN, that can be time consuming. So this is if you want a separate loop over your files to see how fast he gets all the information about a file, you can add or remove this. If you put REM in front of the line, he will not process it. If you remove the REM and put get file info to true, he will process it. And also you can decide if you want to copy the file before cataloging. So if you want to simulate, for instance, a RoboFlow process where you would copy in a hot folder procedure, first copy the file to a local disk or to another location, to its target final location. You can catalog it afterwards. That's what the standard hot folder does in RoboFlow. Well, you can test this with this functionality. This is how it is. If you remove this parameter, it will enable you to test exactly that procedure. Finally, you can also decide to delete the copied file after it was copied. Make sure that you're using test files, because if you delete it, it's really deleted. By default, this application runs single threaded, so it processes one file, waits for the result, and then goes to the next. But in some cases, you want to simulate multi-threaded cataloging. For instance, if you have in RoboFlow multiple workflows that work one next to the other simultaneously, then you might have multiple cataloging processes simultaneously. So you can simulate that and see what your computer does, if it's still fast enough, if it's not going into 100%, etc., etc. So if you put the number of threads, for instance, to 5, you will see what the difference in cataloging speed is. So that are all the parameters that you need to check. If once you've set those parameters, the other parameters or the other stuff below is technical stuff you don't need to touch. All you can do is now save the file and run it. So if I click here on test speed, it will execute this process. It will of course output nothing here into your result because there's nothing to output. It's all stored in that txt file that we will open. So you see, you get also an information about when it was started and when it was stopped. And now I click on done and I go here. And here is the result. You can see that at the top you get the information about all the parameters that I've set. We set it to debug, so you get individual information per file, how long it took for first the inventory part. If you have get file info enabled, then it will give you that information too. In this case it was disabled. You can see that we did single threaded cataloging, and here we see the files individually being cataloged. You can see and go back and find out why certain files were faster or slower than other files. So you get all the detailed information about that too. And at the end you get a detailed summary of how long it took to make the inventory. We processed 20 files. It says actually 24, but some files or folders that he processed were skipped because we had a file filter being JPEG. It took him 10 milliseconds, which is of course super fast, and then so less than a millisecond per file because we're doing this on a local SD drive. We'll repeat the test in a minute. And then you can get an individual summary of how many files were cataloged. So if some files failed, you will see less records, and you can see why. You can get the error message. The total time was 11 seconds, and it was on average 556 milliseconds per file, which is of course very fast. There will not be much room for improvement here in a single threaded test. So now you can repeat the test and do it multi-threaded, for instance, and see if that improves your result. The more files you have, of course, the more multi-threads will speed up the process. If I quickly go back here and I say now I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to do a network drive, and I run the same test. Here we go. It's running the test. Now it's going to the network drive. Remember, the other one was finished in a couple of seconds. This one going to the network drive will take a little bit longer. And finally, we finished this test. We go to have a look at the result. And what do we see? In the summary now, we cataloged the same amount of inventory, same files, but there was an average of 450 milliseconds per file just to access the file, which is extremely slow. You see the cataloging process in this one was now 1.6 seconds per file, and just cataloging one file after taking the inventory in total takes 2 seconds. So that's how you can now start to fine-tune and look for possibilities to improve this process. So this was an example of how you can use this tool to improve your Cumulus installation. If you have any questions, let me know.